After working with the print statement, using it to print the string hello world to the screen, then we can now look at arithmetic operators. Operators are such as addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. We also have exponential operation operator in Python programming. So, looking at arithmetic operators, we can work with addition, such as 40 plus 2, which will give 42. Then we can also work with subtraction using hyphen, then multiplication using the star, and division using forward slash on your keyboard. So let's go into this in our prompt. Then I go into my Python interpreter by typing Python my command prompt. Then this activates the interpreter. Then I perform some basic operation such as 40 plus 2, which should return 42. Then I also have 43 minus 1, which should return minus 10, which should return 33. Then I can also perform multiplication such as 5 multiplied by 8, which should return 40. And I can also perform division such as 50 divided by 10, which should return 5. But here I'm getting 5.0, which means whenever we perform division in Python, it always returns decimal number, which is known as float. It returns a float number. That is about the basic operators we have in Python: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. We also have what we call the exponential operator, such as if I want a number raised to another. Let's look at our note here. So the operator this perform division, which give 42.0 when we divide 4 by 2. You might wonder why this is so, but it will be explained in the later section. So this operator that we're trying to look at is exponential operator, which we use to raise the power to the power, such as this raised to the power of 2. Then the result that we get from this, add 6 to it. 6 raised to the power of 2 gives 36 plus 6, then that will be 2. So that is a exponential operator. Let's look at that in our code. Here, if I have 6 raised to the power of 2, what I should be expecting is 36. Whereas 6 then multiplied by 2 should give me 12, which means these two operators are different. For me to use multiplication, I only have to use one star. Then for exponential, that is to raise to the power, I have to use 2 stars, which is 6 raised to the power of 2. So now let's look at values and types. Here we have a value is one of the basic things a program work with. That is such as an input. Whatever value you pass in into a print function, it will be returned printed to the screen, like a number or a string. Some values we have seen so far are 2, 42.0, and hello world that we printed to the screen. So these are values that we pass into the computer for it to perform some computation, then give us the result. Using the print statement, we pass in hello world as an input, that is the value, then it print out hello world to the screen without the quote, but the quote is being passed into the print function to indicate that it is a string. Then the values belong to different types, such as integer, which we can say here a whole number, that's 2. Then the other is 42.0, which is the result of division of 84 divided by 2, which will return 42.0. That is the floating point number, and the string hello world that we output to the screen using the print statement. So these are called data types, such as integer, float, string. So now let's look at the data types of some of these values that we have worked with. Going back to our terminal, then we can now look at this data type by saying, okay, if I want to get the type of any data, I use that function called type. This is a function called type to get the data type of any value. Then the value that I'll be passing to it, let me pass a whole number to it first, which is 2. Then I type enter, it returns that this 2 is type of integer. I can check it out again while using 42.0 to check what is the type of this data. Then it will return class float, which means this is a floating point number, that is decimal. Then I can also check for the string that I output to the screen earlier on, such as hello world. So trying to check for this data type will return string, which is class str. So to check if the value, to check the type of any value, we use the type function that we pass in the value that we are trying to check as input. This will return hello world. But surprisingly, string are encoded in quote. So let me check for another number such as type. Let's say type of 5, but this 5 I'll be putting it in quote for us to see the result. Type 5, it returns string. Why is that? It's because this 5 is being enclosed in quotation mark. For any value that we are passing to the function type and it's enclosed in quotation mark, we represent a string. It will return a string as the data type, irrespective of what the type is. So we can now, what we have in our note here is, looking at the type of 2, we return an int. The type of this decimal point number we return float, and type of this string we return class string. So what do we mean by that? In this result, the word class is used in the sense of a category, that is a type category of value. Yeah. Not surprisingly, integers belong to type int, string belong to str, and floating point number belong to float. So what about 2 in quotation mark? This is using single quote. Then we also have 42 also in quotation. We have looked at that as we saw earlier that it returned class string. Why is that? Because it is in quotation mark. So now let's look at this last point that I'll be raising here. When you type a large integer, you're tempted to use comma of digits such as 1 million. That is a that is not a legal integer in Python, but it is legal in mathematics when you are writing it down. So this is 1 million, but passing this into the print function will return this. To return a set of number without repetition. Return 1, then comma 0, then comma 0, just taking 1 without repeating the other two. So that is the effect of using comma. So when you are working with larger int, you don't have to use comma, just type in there and the result will display to you. So while writing code, we come across some errors made by us because we miss out something. So when we make mistake, that mistake will make the program not to run or stop executing, as we know that Python execute or interpret the code line by line. So wherever come across an error, the program will stop executing at that line and return an error message. So the error that we come across are known as bugs in programming. Then the process of tracking those errors down is known as debugging. So when we are trying to get let's say maybe we want to correct some errors in our code, so which are bugs, call that debugging. Now let's look at some basic errors that we might come across. When we come across some errors, especially as a beginner in programming, it becomes very frustrating. But the ability for us to be able to play around those errors will make us um, these skills to be very strong, and the ability to be able to interpret any error message that you get and work with them. So to be able to welcome error messages and working with error, let us embrace some exercises on this. So it's a good idea to read this in the front of a computer so that you can try it out on your own as you go. So whenever you're experimenting with a new feature, you should try to make mistakes, intentionally mistake that you know that okay, this is the mistake I'm making, and look at the error message that it will return. then your ability to understand and interpret these error messages will make you to be able to debug your code faster and understand the syntax of this program. So, for example, in hello world that we printed in the initial video, what happened if we leave out one of the quotation mark? What happened if we leave out both? Or what happened if we spelled this print function wrongly? So let's get into that in our command prompt. So I'm already in my Python shell. As you can see, the interpreter is ready for me. Then I can say, okay, I want to intentionally make some errors, such as leaving out one of these quotation mark that I'll be using in printing a string to the screen. Then the string I'm trying to print now is my name. I'll just say Salami Dullah. Then I would intentionally leave out this closing quotation and use the closing parenthesis instead. And as we know, string are supposed to be enclosed in quotation mark. So here I'm only giving the starting and skipping the closing parenthesis, the closing quotation. So pressing enter will return an error message. This at this line is standard input, that is the input I'm giving this my print function. At line 1 says syntax error, which means the syntax of this program is not correct. As we know, Python is a formal language which follows some basic rules in syntax. So once we miss something, the interpreter will not be able to understand what you're trying to do, then return an error message. It says unterminated string literal detected at line 1. So it says unterminated string. This string is not terminated, which means this is an error because I'm not closing this with a closing parenthesis. I can either use double quotes or single quotes in my print function, print and print a string to the screen. But whichever one I start with is what I will end with. Starting with double quotes, I have to end with double quotes. Starting with single quotes, I have to also end with single. So now let us work with the second one that says, okay, what happened if we leave out the quotation mark that we didn't put it at all? So I can just say, okay, what happened if I leave that out? No quotation mark in this case. Then we see another error. It says standard input. On this input, line 1, we have an error message. It says syntax error, invalid syntax. Perhaps you forgot a comma. But comma is not the case here because this is supposed to be enclosed in quotation marks. So your ability to be able to understand whatever error message that you are receiving will give you the strength and spirit debugging your code. So let's look at the other one that says let's misspell this print statement. The spelling of this will give us an error message also. Let's say instead of print, then I intentionally leave out the I and type in this correctly. Typing in my name, that's my first name. Then I close it, close the parenthesis. From this point down to this point are correct, but this print here is misspelled. So let's see the error message that will be returned. It says trace back, most recent score, last score. It says this standard input line 1. It says name error. The name of a particular function or keyword is spelled. It says name print is not defined. Did you mean print? So this interpreter is able to identify the error because I'm not following the rule that guide the structure of this language. It says name error, do I mean print? So now let me output what I want out to the screen correctly this time. Then here I'm using single quotes to enclose my string. Then I type enter. Then it outputs my name without an error message because everything here works absolutely fine. The print statement, then I'm trying to print out a string quotes which work absolutely fine. Now let's go back to our notes. Then we have been able to work these 3 things that might happen while working with the print function. It says this kind of experiment help you remember what you and it helps you as your programming, because you get to know what the error message means. Working with those error message will make you better and be able to solve problems very fast. So in a print statement, what happens if you leave out one of the parentheses or both? What will happen once we leave out one of the parentheses or both? Okay, and this one says you should leave out parentheses. If we leave out parentheses, the parentheses is the bracket that we use in using print statement to make it function, as we discussed in the earlier video, that Python 2 not use print as a function. It only use it as a statement, and whatever you put in is put in a string or whatever value you're trying to pass in, maybe integer value without the quotation. So in Python 2, this should just work absolutely fine. But in Python 3 that I'm using here, if I try to print this without the parentheses, it will return an error message saying print this salami. It says syntax error, missing parentheses in call to print. Did you mean print? Because it's trying to tell me that print here is a function and I have to put whatever I'm going to be printing in parentheses, such as salami. So about that, I can also say, okay, what if I leave out one of it? What if I leave out one of the parentheses? Closing this, it's return something that says, okay, I'm not done with whatever I'm trying to output to the screen, because it's expecting a closing parenthesis. And indentation is very important in Python programming. Get to look at those in upcoming lessons. Going back to our question, we have, if you are trying to print a string, what happens if you leave out one of the quotation mark or both? We have been able to look at that here. We have been able to look at that on this line. If you leave out one of the quotation mark, return an error here saying unterminated string. And when we leave out both quotation marks, here it return a syntax error saying perhaps you forgot a comma, which is expecting a comma. That means it's a variable and it's another variable. Here we are using, these are just mere strings that we are supposed to work with. So it will return an error message. It says you can use a minus sign. Yes, minus 2 will return minus 2 and plus 2 will return. So I can just say that that will work fine. Using minus 2 will return plus 2, and using plus 2 will return this, and 2 plus plus 2 will return 4. That is the solution to those. You can look out to more exercises on your own by doing this. Thank you for staying with us, and follow up next lesson. The next lesson will be variables.